Hello and welcome to the Office 365 Bootcamp. Today we're talking about enterprise mobility services.
And security.
And security. So today we have a special guest in today. This is Joe Custer, who is our Solution Director for Enterprise Security and Compliance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. Joe here is going to talk to us about some of the things that we talked about in the other track that we did, where we showed a number of the mobile applications that we've got, and also how we used OneDrive, we used SharePoint and email. We have to control how people are actually using our information inside of Office 365. So Joe, let's start first. Let's talk about the explosion of mobile devices that have happened inside of the corporation. And a lot of companies don't want to go around and give iPhones to everybody because everybody already has one, or buy tablets for people because a lot of them have got their own already. So how can we as administrators actually control the plethora of devices that are out there and let people use their personal devices? They call it what, BYOD, bring your own device, into the enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a lot of tools that are built into Office 365, as well as the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite. So across that, we have the Secure Productive Enterprise, once we add in Windows. But we have a lot of tools to be able to start securing things like BYOD. So first and foremost, I can do blocking of unapproved devices until they meet a security platform. So the idea is to have a certain level of trust in the devices and applications and data that they're being managed correctly, and we can use the identity as the control plane over it.
So what you're saying is that, for example, I can control the type of phones that I'm allowing people to actually join to the domain.
Well, it's not joining to the domain, it's effectively having it where it's joining to your environment and making sure that it's configured in a way that meets your requirements.
Like requiring a passcode.
Requiring a passcode, screen lockouts, but also things like preventing them from leaking your company data to unapproved things. So if you don't want them to leak your company data to their personal services or cloud services, whether that's taking your company financials and then putting it on Twitter. So we can prevent those type of vulnerabilities and concerns.
Okay. So how do we go about doing those kinds of things? So if I want to set it up to where before somebody can start using their personal device, I need to make sure, as you said, that they have a lockout, that they have a passcode. What are the capabilities inside of Office 365 that enable me to do that?
Sure. So what we can use is the mobile application management controls. That's largely provided underneath Intune. So underneath Microsoft Intune, we're able to craft a series of policies that let you control the device, configure it, as well as measure the compliance. So in other words, if we wanted to be able to say you want to ask your employees to be able to enroll their devices if they'd like to use your email, you can say, okay, download this app, sign into it, and it's going to set your following rules so that you have a trusted platform. Once that's done, it's going to install applications and make sure that your data is handled the way you intend it to be handled.
So in that realm, you said install applications. So like if I want them to use the Outlook app as opposed to the native mail app, I could actually force that?
Absolutely. So there's a handful of ways of doing that, but we can actually build, what's a trusted mail client look like. So we can say if you wanted to block generic Exchange ActiveSync, which would be what Apple Mail uses, for example. Because Apple Mail, while it may be handy for integration with Siri, it doesn't offer a lot of the same security controls, like native containerization and native rights management to be able to read encrypted emails.
So when you say native containerization, what does that mean to someone like me who doesn't work with that every day?
Sure. So Microsoft tends to use the term mobile application management, which says I can have information stored along with my applications and be able to prevent that data from being copied to other untrusted apps. And I get to define what is a trusted app. So it's not just the Microsoft stack. I get to say I have full version Word, I have full version Outlook, and I have full version Exchange. That's fine. But it directly integrates with Salesforce and Dropbox and other tools like that. So I can actually, even if I'm writing my own apps, I can still have that same security. So I can say, here's my 15 trusted apps. I can move my company data safely between any of them because I trust all of those services. But as soon as I try and copy a file, do a screenshot and share, copy and paste, things like that, outside of my containers, my zone of trust, then it's going to be able to block that. In addition, I also have things like selective wipe control, so that whenever that person leaves the organization or that device is lost or stolen, I can safely remove any of my company data or access to that data.
And you said selective wipe, so it's not wiping the entire phone, it's just wiping the corporate data that's on the phone.
So you get to choose what's suitable for each scenario. So if it's a stolen device with no hope of retrieval, yeah, you can do a full wipe. The user might prefer that. If it's the scenario of they've just left the organization, we don't want to wipe their kids' pictures off of their iPhone, that's perfectly fine. So we can just say, I know that I can selectively wipe the company applications and the company data from the device.
Okay. And we're all doing that from Intune, you said?
Absolutely. And it has native hooks into Office 365, Outlook, and the desktop clients as well.
Okay. So when you say the hooks into the desktop client, what do you mean by that?
So we can do things like automatically trust any of your domain joined workstations. So if it's on your domain joined list, we can integrate with Active Directory Federation services and things like that to be able to let them automatically in. But otherwise, I could block somebody's work from home Windows system until they have enrolled and become compliant with my rules.
Oh, so I could actually take a Windows box like my home PC, and you as an administrator could let me enroll that, and that would require things like you said before, that I have a password, that I have a screen lock, that my drive is encrypted or something like that, right? All those things we could do?
Absolutely.
Excellent. And so in that situation, then I could actually work on my home PC on corporate data, and you'd have the ability to remote wipe it when I leave the organization?
Well, I've got a couple different ways of doing that.
Okay.
So I could either say I've got things like Windows Information Protection, which would encrypt it on the way down, in which case, as soon as I've removed you from accessing that file, either by disabling your Active Directory account, or I have went in to say you're no longer allowed to view financial data, I can immediately revoke your access there on the spot.
That's kind of like the Azure Rights Management, similar. Not exactly the same, I recognize, but if my account is disabled, I can't get to any Azure Rights Management files at that point in time. Exactly.
So in Azure Rights Management and Azure Information Protection, as it's becoming, are natively integrated into Office 365. So we can even say, as I send you an email, it can inspect it and say, that looks like that has a social security number in it. I'm going to protect that automatically on Joe's behalf and allow that to still be sent. Or I can still allow that to be shared outside of my organization, but to only an intended audience and for only certain use cases.
Okay.
So I can do that with SharePoint, I can do that with OneDrive, I can do that with Exchange, and be able to inspect the company data and force classifications and role sets.
So there's a lot more to this whole BYOD thing than just actually enrolling the devices. There's a lot of discussion about what you want to do with these devices, what you're going to allow people to do, and what's going to happen when that person is no longer working with that device.
Absolutely. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, you want to protect your company data regardless of where it goes and regardless of where those devices travel.
So how hard is it for an end user then to actually enroll a device? So let's say, for example, I am traveling and I'm visiting my parents, and I'm deciding I want to work off my dad's PC at home, right? In that situation, how hard is it for me to actually enroll my dad's PC then into where I can actually work off of it?
Really simple. So basically, depending on which operating system, and that's just the fact that the newer operating systems have actually built in the capabilities. So if we're talking about things like Windows 10, you can just go to Settings and then Work Join, and I put in my password, username and password. And it is then going to automatically enroll and become protected, and as soon as I'm done working, I can remove that access, and it removes my ability and any controls on those PCs.
Fascinating. So obviously, even in that standpoint, securing corporate information it's more than just encrypting emails going back and forth. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So you mentioned something earlier, and I wanted to dive into a little bit more, You mentioned, let's say that I'm working off of my iPhone or my iPad or my Samsung, and I'm using Outlook because you've told me I need to use a secure mail client, and that's the one I'm using. And I get an email with, say, a customer list that has a whole bunch of information about the customers, and I decide I'm going to email that out of the organization, and to be, and I know that if I email it with my corporate account, well, you're going to be able to see that I did that. So what I'll do is I'll forward the email, but I'll switch the account so that I'm now using my Hotmail account or my Outlook.com account to go and do that. So let's say that I have this list of corporate accounts, and I have it on my phone, I'm using Outlook, and I decide I'm going to forward it to myself, but I know that if I forward it to myself using my corporate email, you guys will know that it's happened. So I'm going to be sneaky and use my Outlook.com email instead. Can we protect against something like that?
Absolutely. And even within the Outlook app itself, say for instance you have your personal Outlook.com account joined, your personal Gmail or Yahoo, doesn't really matter. It has the concept of identity awareness even within the application. So even inside a single application, it's going to know this is company data, treat it as company data, and don't allow it to be copied over to untrusted locations. And we can certainly highlight that capability.
You got an example to show us here what that looks like?
Absolutely. Okay. So let me switch over to my iPad. So what we've got here is I've got a standard iPad where, let me cast that up to the screen in a way that's a little bit more practical. All right. So I've actually got Microsoft Outlook, I've got Word, I've got Excel on this particular iPad. Those are my trusted applications. But if I'm a user like you just mentioned, and I've got particular files I'm working with, in this case I've got an Excel spreadsheet that is financial in nature. So I'm going to go ahead and open Excel. So this will give me a preview, and I can basically go through this scenario. And I've got my company data about our budget. Okay. So I can copy this information, and if I want to, I can go ahead and open Word, for example, because that's a trusted application. And you can see it actually blurred it there for a moment because it actually does blur my information as I go through it. So I'm able to do my normal job while I'm working within my apps. However, if I hopped over to Apple Notes, now Apple Notes in this case is not managed. So if I go ahead and try and edit one of these and pop in some text, so if I try and hit paste, it's going to tell me your organization's data cannot be pasted here. So it enforces my corporate trust rules as I go throughout my day-to-day business.
So notes we've shown here, if they were using charts or I'm trying to remember what the Apple apps are called off the top of my head. There's charts and there's numbers and I forget what the other one's called off the top of my head.
And I could do the same thing for, Apple Mail in this case is not trusted, or any other applications that are not explicitly trusted as part of this are going to block.
But like, for example, OneNote would be. So I could continue to use OneNote, right? But I wouldn't necessarily be able to use, say, Evernote, maybe, if Evernote's not trusted.
You get to decide what is trusted, because maybe you decide that Evernote is okay. Yeah. Because maybe you're using Evernote for business. And matter of fact, out of these same tools, we can do single sign-on to Evernote.
Oh, really?
So we can do things like single sign-on, let you use your Active Directory credentials to be able to access it. So that way, whenever that person leaves the organization, we can disable them in one spot and know that their access is being deprovisioned.
Okay. Well, let me talk about another scenario that often comes up. Let's say that you've got that same Excel spreadsheet, right? And you store it in SharePoint or your OneDrive for Business, or even an email, and you decide, I'm going to send this outside of the organization. I'm going to email it to the local, to our competitor, for example. Exactly. And I don't want that to happen. As an organization, what kind of controls can I place on documents like that to make sure that they're not sent where they're not supposed to go, or not to whom they're not supposed to go? We'll put it that way.
Absolutely. So Cloud App Security and the Office 365 Advanced Security Toolsets give us a lot of power to be able to define how our data should be handled. And so I can actually create a policy that would prevent sharing of my data or sending emails to things like competitors. So I can say, here's the domains that are not allowed, and I can even say for specific types of data. So maybe we can email back and forth to a partner organization, but I do not want my HR data being exposed to that organization. So I can define what's appropriate for each individual type of data I've got.
Okay. And so how do I know that, like, for example, that Excel document that you brought up, how would we know that that's a secure document as opposed to one that isn't secured?
Sure. So whenever we start looking at our various documents, so I've got the same document here on my desktop, and if I open this file, at this point, it's currently not encrypted. It's locally on my system.
Okay.
So at this point, you'll see the lovely little banner up at the top, and it currently says, it has no special banners or associations.
Okay.
But all I have to do as a user, I could selectively say this is company confidential. Click single button.
Okay.
And from there on, everywhere this goes, it's going to respect my encryption rights.
Okay.
So I could do that automatically as well. So I could set, as an administrator, I can set a rule that says, look for certain types of data.
Okay.
Look for patterns that I get to set, or just look for things like passports or driver's license numbers or even IP addresses, much less social security numbers, credit cards, the entire list. So as I create those various rules, I can automatically classify it appropriately. So in this case, it's company confidential. And if I send this to somebody, it is automatically going to respect my usage rights. So if I tried to open this in my company Gmail or whatnot, it's going to say you do not have rights to open this file. So if I wanted to be able to share this with somebody, so I've got this classify and protect option. So I can say this is currently company confidential, and I could go through, and anybody who has access to that template is automatically going to be able to use it. But if I want to be able to share it with somebody outside, I can actually set up custom permissions. So as I go through, I could say, you know what? I need to be able to share this with somebody outside of my organization, somebody who's helping me with a marketing campaign, somebody who's helping me process my taxes, or an accountant or an auditor. So I need to be able to make sure that they have access. But I get to choose what level of access.
Okay.
So I get to choose, do they have view-only access? Do they have complete co-owner, which lets them remove protections? So as I go through that, I can say, you know what? I'm going to give you view-only access, and I can just throw in here, I'm sharing it with Bob Jones.
Okay.
And I can even expire Bob's access. So I can actually choose down here in the bottom, his access expires at the end of the month, and I hit apply. I can email that file, I can put it in Dropbox. Doesn't matter. It's fully encrypted and it's fully protected no matter where it travels, even if it's on a USB drive, even if it's been backed up somewhere out of my control. I still am going to be asked, as soon as I try and open that file, please log in with an account that has credentials and permissions to be able to open it.
Makes sense. So, and so that would work whether that document is emailed, as you said, on a USB, or whether it's in OneDrive for Business or SharePoint at that point in time. And I know that one of the things we can do, and I've seen this, we've done this obviously in SharePoint, I can actually set that up to where everything created in a certain library automatically gets those permissions. Now, what you showed with the custom permissions, is it possible to restrict that so that not everybody can do that, or that they have to get permission before they're allowed to actually remove permissions?
Yes, it is one of those things that as an administrator, I decide what's appropriate for my environment.
Okay.
So even within that, I do have, if you'd like, SharePoint libraries set up with that, as well as one of the common scenarios is, what about the body of an email? So one of the pieces that customers will ask is, how do I handle internal email that needs to be secured? Or if I need to be able to intercept email coming from outside of my organization to make sure it's handled correctly.
So in this case, Joe, how do we know that a document actually has to be secured? So we've talked about how you can automatically determine that there's specific information inside of that document. So you were going to show us something about that.
Absolutely. So we've got things like pattern matching, inspection, data loss prevention rights to be able to leverage out of Office 365, as well as Azure Rights Management, Cloud App Security, and the whole stack basically bearing those abilities. So in this case, we've got some test credit cards. I'm going to go ahead and email that over to one of my test users. So as soon as I hit send, we should see this email go through. And it has gone through Exchange Online. So now it's being inspected, and now it's already arrived back, and it's saying this message currently contains proprietary information for internal use. It has inspected this, found that there's credit cards, and automatically encrypted it on my behalf. So now if I try to forward this to somebody outside my organization, they won't be able to read it. And in addition, you'll notice that my administrator has just received an alert that somebody tried to send sensitive information through email.
Interesting. And so in this case, it says it cannot be copied and printed. So if I tried to copy this information and take it someplace else, it's going to go ahead and block me from doing that. And if I try to send it to a printer, it's not going to let me do that either.
Exactly.
What about like screenshots? Can we prevent against those?
Absolutely.
Okay. But not necessarily against me taking a picture of the screen. We can't control that yet, right?
Well, you can't control every bit of user behavior.
Well, I think as somebody told me one time, a lot of this stuff it's kind of like a bicycle lock. It's designed to keep honest people honest. But we do the best that we can, right?
As well as keep the lazy thieves out of your environment.
Very true. So how did it know, I mean, we see a bunch of credit cards inside of here, but how did you actually set it up from an administration standpoint to actually recognize these kinds of numbers and things like that?
Sure. So that's actually just simply an Exchange Online mail transport layer. If it's mail transport layer on premises, and it's a mail flow rule in Office 365.
Okay.
So that gives us the ability of inspecting the content that's going back and forth. And in addition, Cloud App Security gives me the same type of insight into things like OneDrive.
And so that way what you're saying is if this document was stuck in somebody's OneDrive and they tried to share it with somebody outside the organization, it would notify their administrator that they tried to share this document at that point in time. And we could block that, we could lock that down if we needed to.
Absolutely, and I can show you what that looks like right now.
Awesome, that'd be great.
All right, so I'm going to switch users over to an administrator. Head over to Cloud App Security. So let me go ahead.
Log into Cloud App Security.
All right, so let's go ahead and log into Cloud App Security. I'll go ahead and throw in my demo user. And this particular user has multi-factor authentication enabled. So I immediately get a ding on my phone. I can hit approve.
So in that situation, what's happened is you've had to have your user ID and password, but it then is sending a signal out to your phone, and you're having to actually authenticate using the Authenticator app off of your phone before it actually grants you access in.
So it's what you know plus what you have or what you are.
Okay.
So in this case, I could have used biometrics, I could have used text messages, phone calls, or I could have used text messages, or in this case, an application prompt. So from that perspective, I could have even gone the route of using a fingerprint to secure it, so I could just tap my finger and it would recognize username plus password plus fingerprint or application prompt to an approved device. That is, an additional factor. So that prevents my administrator account from, let's go ahead and say, for instance, somebody brute forced my account. That's not enough. I'm going to immediately get a ding on my phone saying, are you okay authorizing this?
And if you weren't, then you're obviously going to say no at that point in time.
Exactly. So at that point, I can hit a single button and reset my password because I know it's been compromised.
And so you can set up everybody in your organization to require multi-factor authentication, or can you do it for just certain people?
You get to pick and choose.
Okay.
So in addition, you can set what types of options they have. So I could say, you know what, I've got a bunch of users who don't have smartphones. Maybe I don't want to assume that they have a smartphone available or even a phone number available. I can still use things like hard tokens for a rolling key if I want to go that route. So I could hand out a physical thing to folks who I can't assume have access to those.
Ah, okay. So like the little dongles people have got that generate a number.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if I've got the little key fob, that's the rolling, we call it a hard token, but it's it rolls over a number, so that way we're able to generate a unique authenticator.
And then I've also had ones where it text messages me a number and I have to type it back in as well.
That's also an option. So if that's a two-way SMS, and we can do two-way SMS plus PIN. So it's not enough that you just have access to your cell phone and can reply back. It can also be a PIN number that guarantees that, you know, just like your credit card PIN number or your ATM PIN number, we have that additional factor. So it's username plus password plus access to your mobile phone plus an additional thing that you know at that point in time to really trust that that was you who was typing that in.
Okay. Sounds great.
All right, so we were talking about being able to do our inspection. And here I've got Cloud App Security. I've got my lovely dashboard, and it's giving me a high-level view of all of the threats in my environment. Outdated browsers, administration from non-administrative IP addresses. I can actually see my security violations, content violations like files that contain PII that are currently being stored in the cloud. So if I want to drill down into that, I can actually pick and say, hey, you know what? Here's somebody has uploaded the server passwords list to SharePoint Online. And I can inspect that and say, hey, this currently contains information that I have deemed sensitive. In addition, I could start looking at things like my users have uploaded their W-2s to OneDrive. And that's a very common thing for our clients, is being able to identify where users are sharing their data in ways they shouldn't.
And I see on here it's telling you who's got access to this, whether it's private and the source it's coming from. And I see it's actually going to look into Salesforce and Box as well. So it's not just Office 365, but we can even go into other areas as well.
Absolutely. So Cloud App Security lets me discover shadow IT. So it can do things like find your users are currently using Evernote and be able to identify that. And then we get to choose, does this integrate with those SaaS applications like AWS or Salesforce or Concur, things like that. Okay. So we can integrate with it and make it trusted as a sanctioned application, or else we can say, I'm going to block it. And interestingly, I can go down through here and build a dashboard that shows me, you know, digest all my firewall and proxy logs, but it can actually generate a block file to be able to say, if I've got Blue Coat Security or Zscaler or Squid or something like that, it'll actually generate the block list for me based on the threats that I have said I want to block.
Okay. And so the last question I'll ask you around this one, I guess, is Cloud App Security. That's not part of Office 365, or it is part of Office 365. All this stuff gets very interesting because it's all kind of related, but it gets confusing as to what is Office 365 and what isn't.
Okay, so the basic content capabilities of being able to do Office 365 Advanced Security. So Office 365 is Office 365 Advanced Security is another name for Cloud App Security.
Okay.
CAS, Cloud App Security, increases the capability beyond just Office 365.
Okay.
So I still have a lot of these abilities underneath the Office 365 E5 license. Okay. So Office 365 Advanced Security, part of the 365 E5 suite, or else you could buy it separate. Or you can have CAS, which has more features, which then is able to bring in a lot more ability to control your data, especially where it's not just being used in 365. But both are very great, you know, both use the same dashboard, both use the same tools. You'll just see a different logo in the upper left-hand corner. But either which way, you still get all of the features from Secure Productive Enterprise.
But I wanted to thank you very much for coming in, and I wanted to thank everybody for sticking through this particular episode of the Office 365 Bootcamp. And I hope you watch the rest of the ones, all the ones we have, both the user track, the end user track, and also the administrative track. Thank you very much.